What if I told you that a story about a farm boy, a princess, a roguish smuggler, and a magic sword did more than top the box office? It rewired how Hollywood makes movies and how fans imagine the future. Welcome to Unboxd Origins. I'm Howie, your resident science geek and accidental trivia sponge.
And I'm Wyatt. I ask the big questions. Sometimes philosophical, often skeptical, always curious.
Today, we're digging into how did the Star Wars franchise start a sci-fi revolution? Let's kick off with the obvious. George Lucas didn't wake up and invent science fiction. He stood on a heap of pulp, film serials, samurai films, and myth. Lucas grew up loving Flash Gordon serials that played like cliffhanger TV episodes in movie form. He also devoured Kurosawa samurai epics and westerns. When you look at young Lucas's notes, you don't see a sterile blueprint for an extrapolated future. You see a scrapbook, planet maps, heroic archetypes, a villain in a black helmet like a medieval knight, and a clearly defined serial rhythm. He wanted to make a modern myth that felt like an old one. A space opera, sure, but more importantly, a fairy tale with spaceships. So the origin story begins with inspiration, a hunger for storytelling templates, and a can-do attitude that said, if the film industry won't give me what I want, I'll find a way. Next comes the production drama. Lucas got a modest budget, a skeptical studio, and a script full of things that hadn't been done before on that scale. Visual effects were notoriously stubborn in the 1970s. To film starships convincingly, you needed motion control cameras, miniatures filmed against carefully planned backgrounds, and compositing techniques that wouldn't make models look like toys. Enter John Dykstra and his team at the newly formed Industrial Light and Magic, ILM. They built a motion control rig, artists called it the Dykstra Flex, that let cameras repeat exact movements so multiple elements could be composited perfectly. Ben Burtt invented new sound languages, the hum of the lightsaber, the metallic cough of Darth Vader's respirator, created in part from recordings of a scuba regulator, and R2-D2's expressive bleeps. John Williams came in with a full-throated symphonic score that treated space like mythic landscape rather than sterile futurism. These weren't small tweaks, they were technical leaps. ILM became an idea factory. The techniques refined for Star Wars would later seed the modern VFX industry. But revolution wasn't purely technical. It had a business angle that Hollywood hadn't quite seen. Jaws in 1975 had already taught studios the power of a summer tentpole and national television advertising. But Star Wars transformed the economics. Lucas insisted on merchandising and licensing rights, a decision that would seem minor until Kenner couldn't produce enough action figures in time and sold early bird, mail-away certificates that parents bought for Christmas. For the first time in the modern blockbuster era, downstream revenue streams, toys, lunchboxes, novels, comics, became as consequential as box office receipts. Studios realized you could turn a film into an entire consumer ecosystem. That's a seismic shift. Films were no longer just one-off art objects. They were intellectual properties to be nurtured, cross-sold, and serialized. Merchandising redesigned the financial calculus of filmmaking and helped make sequels and expanded universes not just possible, but profitable. And then there was the audience. Sci-fi had been a genre that lived partially in the shadows, cults of readers and weekend matinees, often cerebral, dystopian, or allegorical. Star Wars reimagined sci-fi as family-friendly, emotionally immediate, and mythic. Instead of cold, clinical speculation about technology, it offered swashbuckling space adventure infused with clear moral lines and archetypes. Families flocked to it. Children memorized lines and recreated scenes in backyards. That broad appeal changed what mainstream audiences expected from science fiction. It wasn't a retreat from big ideas. Themes about authoritarianism, the corrupting nature of power, and the loss of innocence run through it. But the wrapping was accessible. The franchise helped legitimize sci-fi to studio executives and audiences as a bankable genre that could rival fantasy and adventure. Suddenly, spaceships could sell plush toys at cereal brand tie-ins, and a movie could be a cultural event in the way only blockbusters had ever been.
Aha! Pause right there, and let's not let the technical glitz distract us from a quieter, often overlooked pivot. Star Wars' revolution was not only in special effects, merchandising, or even mythic storytelling. Its most radical move was reframing the future as narrative heritage. In other words, George Lucas didn't present a carefully extrapolated future of plausible technology and social change. He presented a future that looked and felt like the past. The Star Wars galaxy is a dusty frontier, a feudal empire, and a samurai code all at once. Its spaceships bear soot and scratches. Its heroes are archetypes with familiar journeys. That reframing mattered because it made science fiction relatable. People didn't need to understand how faster-than-light drives work. They needed to understand the battle for freedom, the mentor-student bond, and the rite of passage. The revolution, then, is philosophical. Star Wars turned speculative futures into mythic presents, and that shift opened the door for mass appeal sci-fi. It taught audiences to recognize technology as a backdrop for human drama, rather than the drama itself.
Right, and the ripple effects in the industry were unmistakable. After Star Wars, studios began to build films as franchises, characters that could live beyond their original movies, universes that could be mined for spin-offs, and merchandising deals that guaranteed ancillary income. The VFX revolution seeded a new generation of shops and digital workflows, eventually driving filmmakers to push for ever more spectacular visuals. Lucas's insistence on sound quality led to the creation of THX by Lucasfilm in the early 1980s, which improved how films were mixed and played in theaters. Narrative-wise, the idea of serialized storytelling returned in a big way. Audiences came to expect sequels, trilogies, prequels, and later, sprawling cinematic universes. Fan culture matured into a powerful force. Conventions, fan fiction, and expanded universe novels kept the galaxy far, far away, alive between theatrical windows. This created a feedback loop. Fans demanded more content, studios supplied it, and the economic model shifted from single spectacle to long-term investment. There were critiques, of course, commercialization, formula, and the potential for creative stasis when profit motives overrule artistic risk. But even critics acknowledged that Star Wars had demonstrated new possibilities for how pop culture could be produced and consumed.
And here's another twist people often miss. Star Wars' origins are embedded in constraint. The technical breakthroughs emerged because things were breaking. Models didn't behave, budgets were tight, and schedules were compressed. The Dijkstraflex wasn't invented because someone wanted to make a splashy camera gizmo. It was developed because the only way to composite the miniature X-Wings against the Death Star without looking like cardboard was to repeat camera moves precisely. Ben Burtt didn't design the lightsaber hum as an intellectual exercise. It was about making a sound that could speak emotion in a world without obvious visual cues for the mystical. Constraint bred innovation. The revolution, then, was emergent, driven by necessity and a willingness to invent workarounds that became industry standards. That's a refreshing counter-narrative to the idea of a single genius dictating everything. It's a story of teams, of problem-solving, and of how technical craftsmanship can shape myth-making.
Exactly, and that team-centered DNA is part of what fueled the franchise era. Lucas's model centralized creative control, but decentralized production capability. He created Lucasfilm, ILM, Skywalker Sound, groups that could be hired out and would transform other productions. Those institutions trained generations of technicians, directors, and artists who took those tools into new films and mediums. Think of it as an industrial ecology. A film yields tools, tools yield new films fund studios, and the cycle accelerates. By the time we hit the 90s and 2000s, the language of effects, sound, and franchise building that Star Wars popularized had become mainstream. The modern blockbuster, glossy visuals, transmedia tie-ins, and fandom-driven marketing owes a lot to this chain reaction. It's not that no one would have built this world without Lucas, it's that he provided a fast start, a prototype that got everyone sprinting down a path they might otherwise have taken more slowly.
There's also a socio-cultural context that helps explain the timing. The late 1970s were a period of weariness, post-Vietnam skepticism, economic uncertainty, and a desire for clear moral stories after years of ambiguity. Star Wars landed like a cultural exhale, not simplistic, but restorative. It offered catharsis. A small band of rebels could topple a faceless empire. The hero could ask for guidance and find it. And the sound of a triumphant fanfare could sweep audiences into a communal moment. That timing was crucial. Had Star Wars premiered a decade earlier, audiences might have been less receptive. A decade later, the media landscape would have been different. Timing, then, was a silent partner in the revolution.
And let's not forget the long tail. Star Wars continued to shape media well beyond the original films. The novelizations, comics, and role-playing games of the late 70s and 80s cultivated an ecosystem of secondary creators. Fan-run conventions and fan films kept the universe breathing and taught studios how committed audiences could be. When home video arrived, Star Wars became a perennial seller. When Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012, what was at stake wasn't just nostalgia. It was a blueprint for how to run a media empire around a single intellectual property. From streaming shows to theme parks and merchandising, the franchise model that Star Wars helped popularize became the dominant strategy for entertainment conglomerates.
A final aha, the franchise's revolution is paradoxically conservative and transformative. Conservative because it relied on archetypal storytelling, the hero's journey, the mentor, the rebel band, and transformative because it rewired industry economics, technology, and audience expectations. It's a rare cultural artifact that manages both. And perhaps the most interesting consequence is a cultural negotiation about ownership. For decades, fans have argued over what counts as real Star Wars. The films, the books, the toys, the adapted versions. That debate is itself revolutionary, because it moved cultural authority away from producers alone and into the hands of communities. Thus, part of the franchise's legacy is to democratize belonging. Fans made the galaxy their own, and in doing so, shaped how studios would later approach IP.
So why does any of this matter to someone who just loves a good spacefaring yarn? Because Star Wars rewired expectations. It showed that science fiction could be both emotionally resonant and commercially viable. It proved that audiences would embrace mythic storytelling in a high-tech wrapper. It created durable institutions, ILM, Skywalker Sound, franchise-focused marketing that enable future creators to make bolder visual and narrative choices. And it turned the idea of the film as a solitary experience into an ongoing cultural conversation that includes toys, books, games, and fan art. That ecosystem has produced some of our era's most iconic media strategies, shared universes, serialized storytelling, and transmedia narratives that keep audiences engaged between theatrical releases.
And on a philosophical note, the revolution matters because it reshaped how we think about the future. Instead of predicting what technology might do, Star Wars offered stories about what people would do with power, with fear, and with hope. It reminded us that the true speculative engine of science fiction is human moral imagination, what we choose to become. In doing so, it opened the gate for countless creators to tell stories that are at once fantastical and deeply human. The franchise didn't just change special effects or toy aisles, It invited society to reclaim myth for a modern age.
So there you have it. The revolution started with a scrap of inspiration and a determined filmmaker, but it expanded into a new industrial strategy, a new language of effects and sound, and a renewed faith in myth-driven storytelling. It changed how studios invest, how audiences consume, and how fans participate.
Ultimately, the story of Star Wars Revolution is our story too. Of invention born from constraint, of myth recycled into modern currency, and of communities shaping the culture they love. Whether you measure impact in box office dollars, in the careers seeded at IL-M, or in the way a lightsaber noise weaved its way into our cultural memory, the franchise altered the landscape of popular storytelling.
If you like this deep dive, please like, subscribe, and share, and tell us in the comments what origin story you want unboxed next. So, did a farm boy, a princess, and a wise old Jedi really kickstart a sci-fi revolution?